You're standing in the grocery store staring at two different brands of pasta sauce, and somehow this simple choice has turned into a 5-minute internal debate. Or maybe you've spent weeks agonizing over whether to take that new job, switch careers, or end a relationship that's clearly not working. Here's the thing about decision-making that nobody really talks about. Most of us are absolutely terrible at it. Not because we're stupid, but because we've never been taught how to actually make decisions systematically. But what if I told you that there's a decision-making framework that was literally developed in the heat of combat, tested under the most extreme pressure imaginable, and has since been adopted by everyone from emergency room doctors to Fortune 500 CEOs? And here's the kicker. It takes about 4 steps and can be learned in the next 10 minutes. Today, we're diving into something called the OODA Loop, a tactical decision-making process that emerged from military aviation and has quietly revolutionized how high performers think about choices, strategy, and getting things done in the real world. Before we get into the solution, let's be honest about the problem. When most people face a decision, they do what psychologists call satisficing. They look at a few options, pick the first one that seems good enough, and hope for the best. Or they go to the opposite extreme and get stuck in what researchers call analysis paralysis, gathering endless information but never actually choosing. A study from Columbia University, where psychologist Sheena Iyengar set up a jam tasting booth at a grocery store. When they offered 24 varieties, 60% of people stopped to look, but when they offered only 6 varieties, 30% stopped. Here's the crazy part. Of the people who stopped at the 24 variety display, only 3% actually bought jam. Of those who saw 6 varieties, 30% made a purchase. More choices literally made people 10 times less likely to make a decision. This is what psychologists call the paradox of choice, and it's killing our ability to move forward in life. We've got more options than ever before, more information than any generation in history, and somehow we're more stuck than ever. So, let me tell you about a fighter pilot named John Boyd, who cracked the code on rapid decision-making under pressure. Boyd was flying F-86 Sabres during the Korean War in the early 1950s. Now, here's what's interesting. On paper, the enemy MiG-15s were superior aircraft. They could climb faster, fly higher, and had better acceleration. By all technical measures, American pilots should have been getting destroyed. But they weren't. In fact, the kill ratio was heavily in favor of American pilots. Boyd became obsessed with figuring out why. After hundreds of hours of analysis, Boyd discovered something remarkable. The F-86 had 2 crucial advantages: better visibility from the cockpit and hydraulic flight controls that allowed faster transitions between maneuvers. These seemed like small things, but they created what Boyd called a decision cycle advantage. American pilots could observe what was happening faster, orient to new situations quicker, decide on actions more rapidly, and act on those decisions before their opponents could complete their own decision cycles. Boyd formalized this into what he called the OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. But here's where it gets really interesting. Boyd realized this wasn't just about dogfights. This was a fundamental principle of how superior performance works in any competitive environment. And life, whether we like it or not, is competitive. But here's 4 steps that change everything. Step 1. Observe. This is about gathering raw, unfiltered information about your situation. Not your assumptions, not what you think should be happening, but what's actually happening right now. Most people skip this step entirely. They make decisions based on outdated information, wishful thinking, or what worked in completely different circumstances. A study by psychologist Daniel Kahneman found that our brains are constantly running on what he calls fast thinking. We see a situation and immediately jump to conclusions based on pattern recognition and past experience. This works great for avoiding getting hit by cars, but it's terrible for complex decisions. Real observation means stepping back and asking, what am I actually seeing here? What data do I have? What don't I know that I need to know? Step 2. Orient. This is where you make sense of what you've observed. You're synthesizing new information with your existing knowledge, experiences, and mental models. Here's what's crucial. Your orientation is your biggest competitive advantage or your biggest weakness. If you're oriented with outdated assumptions, biased thinking, or rigid mental models, you're going to make poor decisions no matter how good your information is. Boyd called this destructive deduction and creative synthesis. You need to be constantly destroying old ways of thinking that no longer serve you and creating new frameworks for understanding your situation. Step 3. Decide. Here's where most people think the OODA Loop is just about making faster decisions, but Boyd was actually more subtle than that. He realized that in many cases the best decision is to loop back to observation without acting. Sometimes you observe, orient, and realize you need more information. Sometimes you realize your mental model needs updating. The decision might be, don't decide yet. But when you do decide, you're making that choice based on current accurate information and a clear understanding of your situation. Step 4. Act. This is about implementation, but it's also about immediately beginning the next cycle. As soon as you act, you start observing again. How did your action change the situation? What new information do you have? How do you need to adjust? This is what Boyd called operating inside your opponent's decision cycle. While your competition is still gathering information for their first decision, you've already made a choice, implemented it, gathered feedback, and you're on to your second or third iteration. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like common sense. Of course you should gather information and make decisions systematically. But here's the thing, most people don't actually do this. Research from McKinsey & Company found that executives typically use less than half the information available to them when making strategic decisions. And a study from the Harvard Business Review showed that 70% of strategic decisions fail because of poor execution, not poor strategy. We're not failing because we don't know what to do. We're failing because we don't have reliable systems for processing information and making choices under pressure. The OODA Loop works because it's designed for reality. Real life is messy, information is incomplete, circumstances change rapidly, and you rarely have the luxury of perfect information. The quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of your decisions. Not your intentions, not your potential, not how hard you work, your decisions. Most of us make decisions the same way we did when we were teenagers. We rely on gut feelings, we avoid choices that make us uncomfortable, and we consistently overestimate our ability to predict the future. But successful people, whether they realize it or not, tend to use something very similar to the OODA Loop. They gather information systematically, they update their assumptions regularly, they make decisions based on current reality rather than wishful thinking, and they adjust quickly when new information becomes available. The difference between successful people and everyone else isn't talent or luck, it's that they have better systems for making choices. Alright, so how do you actually use this? Let me give you a practical framework you can implement immediately. For everyday decisions, speed up your OODA Loop. Instead of agonizing over small choices, give yourself a time limit. Observe for 2 minutes, orient for 1 minute, decide, and act. Most daily decisions are reversible anyway, so the cost of a suboptimal choice is much lower than the cost of decision paralysis. For major life decisions, slow down your loop but run it more deliberately. If you're considering a career change, don't just make a pro and con list and hope for the best. Observe. What's actually happening in your current situation? What's working? What isn't? What opportunities exist that you haven't considered? Orient. How do your values, goals, and circumstances inform this choice? What assumptions are you making that might not be true? Decide. Based on current information and clear thinking, what's your best choice right now? Act. Take one concrete step toward that choice and immediately start observing again. The beauty of this system is that it's designed for uncertainty. You don't need perfect information to start, you just need to be systematic about processing the information you have and adjusting as you learn more. In a world where everyone has access to the same information, your competitive advantage comes from your ability to process that information and act on it faster and more accurately than everyone else. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, calls this disagree and commit. He's essentially describing a version of the OODA Loop. Gather information quickly, make the best decision you can with incomplete data, commit fully to that decision, and be ready to change course when you learn more. Research from Stanford's Graduate School of Business found that companies that make decisions faster than their competitors are twice as likely to achieve above-average financial performance. This isn't just about business. This is about life. The person who can systematically observe their relationships, career, health, and finances orient to changing circumstances, make clear decisions, and act consistently is going to outperform someone who's stuck in analysis paralysis or making choices based on outdated assumptions. So here's my challenge for you. For the next week, pick one area of your life where you've been stuck or avoiding a decision. It could be anything from cleaning out your closet to having a difficult conversation with someone you care about. Apply the OODA Loop. Spend one day really observing the situation without judgment. What's actually happening? What information do you need? Spend another day orienting. How does this situation fit with your values and goals? What assumptions have you been making? What mental models need updating? Then decide. Not the perfect decision, but the best decision you can make with current information. And then act. Take one concrete step and immediately start the loop again. Remember, the goal isn't to make perfect decisions. Perfect decisions don't exist. The goal is to make better decisions faster and to adjust quickly when reality gives you new information. The pilot who wins the dogfight isn't necessarily the one with the best plane or the most experience. It's the one who can process information and act on it faster than their opponent. In life, your opponent isn't other people, it's uncertainty, changing circumstances, and your own tendency to avoid difficult choices. The OODA Loop is your system for winning that fight, one decision at a time. Now, stop overthinking it and start using it.